Ideas have consequences. That's not only true for the Christian theist, but it's also true for the atheist as well. And so we want to look at some of the implications of atheism, a non-theistic worldview. And so let's go ahead and we'll jump in and do that. Let's play a game and ask ourselves the question of what if atheism is true? Then what are the implications of that? And atheism we can define as the lack of belief in gods. One of the things that I've discovered is that you're never going to find a definition of atheism that's going to suit all atheists. But this definition, that is a lack of belief in God, well, it tells us about the individual. It tells us about that individual's psychology, but it doesn't answer any of the larger questions of life that we're all confronted with. It's not just the Christian that's confronted with these questions, but non-theists are confronted with these questions too. And so we want to look at some of those questions in this broadcast, particularly the questions of purpose, value, meaning, and destiny in life. And so, you see, reality confronts us with a lot more questions than just the does God exist question. There's the whole realm of the natural sciences that we have to consider. And there's a lot of large questions that we're confronted with when we consider that realm. But that's not the only realm of reality that we're confronted with. Our whole human experience, both as individuals and as a society, that we're confronted with a lot of important questions with respect to those, and that it's not just the Christian theist who has to answer those questions. If you're going to be a thinking person, if you're going to give a deep thought to the realities of life, then the non-theist has to give consideration to these questions as well. Some of the questions include, what about the origin of nature? How do we explain that? What about the fine-tuning of the universe for life? How do we account for that? How do we account for this abstract realm of mathematics that so elegantly applies to the physical universe? Where did that come from? Is that just an invention of the human mind, or is it, or this abstract realm is a realm that truly exists, and we discover its truths? What about the origin of life? Is that we find we start off with inorganic matter, and then we end up with organic life. And how do we explain that transition from inorganic matter to life? What about the information that we find in the cell? You know, I don't fault Charles Darwin for his simple understanding of the cell. But as science has progressed, that it's also posed more problems for understanding organic life and the complexity, and not only the complexity of that organic life, but how did the information get into that cell for life to exist? These are just some of the questions that we're faced with in the natural sciences. And that includes the question of complexity. The cell itself is more complex than a human factory. And did all of this just arise by chance or necessity? What's the explanation for these mysteries? What about the diversity in life? Or even the question of the rise of consciousness, is that we see these creatures in reality that seem to be some that just operate by pure instinct, and others that are self-aware. And we as humans, we're self-aware. We contemplate not only these questions about our existence and the world around us, but the questions that we're faced with respect to our own selves. And so these are some of the important questions that we have to ask. When we move into the realm of human experience, we're confronted with the mystery of rationality. Is that how are our beliefs truly true? Or are they just the results of our own brain chemistry, and they deliver to us the particular beliefs that we have? You see, ideas have consequences. That's true not only for the Christian theist, but it's also true for the non-theist. And the non-theist has to explore the consequences, the implications of his or her philosophy or point of view on life, without trying to smuggle in these ideas that we see that are part of theism. And rationality, that if we are just if the human brain is just a machine that's made of meat, that how do we account for rationality or morality? What is the basis for moral values and duties, or our free will? There's a lot of implications. Ideas have consequences. There's a lot of implications for us as humans. And if we are just, if we're just dancing to our DNA and driven by our brain chemistry, then what becomes of a free will? Other questions that we confront. And we're going to be looking at these four today, and that's the question of purpose, meaning, value, and destiny. I've decided that the simplest way to approach this is to let atheists speak for themselves. Because one of the things that I've discovered when atheists speak for themselves is that oftentimes what they say is nonsensical or contradictory, and that you know it just seems to fly in the face of what seems to be commonsensical to us. Now, I thoroughly respect the intelligence of atheists out there. Super intelligent people can be atheists, as well as super intelligent people can be theists, not just with respect to the realm of theology and philosophy, but even in the natural sciences, that there can be super intelligent people in both camps. So, I'm not having that argument about who's smarter. That's not the issue. There can be a lot of ignorant people on both sides of the camp too. But that's not what we're considering. What we're considering is the implications of that, of our belief systems. And their ideas have consequences not just for the theist, but also for the non-theist. And that some of the things that non-theists say just seem very contradictory and nonsensical when it comes to these questions of purpose, meaning, value, and destiny. And so let's set the table with a quote from a famous atheist who says this. Sam Harris, he says, "You can do what you decide to do, but you cannot decide what you will decide to do." That may seem like double talk, but what he's saying here is that we can do what we decide to do, but we are not free to decide what we're going to decide to do. We're driven by our DNA, we're driven by our brain chemistry, and that free will is just an illusion. When I listen to smart people, I sometimes say that smart people say stupid things. And when I listen to smart people say things like this, is that I'm always left with questions. And I'm wondering, with respect to Sam Harris's statement here, does that apply only to us, Christian theists, or does that apply to non-theists as well? You can do what you decide to do, but you cannot decide what you're going to decide to do. If that's the case, then in what meaningful sense is your atheism a position that you have freely and rationally chosen? If free will is just an illusion, then a non-theistic point of view on life, no one chooses that freely. They only come to those conclusions as a result of that's how their brain chemistry works. Nothing more, period, full stop, end of story. There is nothing else out there to explain that. Not only is free will an illusion, but rationality ends up being an illusion too. See my previous video. And so many atheists are materialists. And a materialist is just somebody who says that this physical universe is all that there is, and the laws of nature are sufficient to describe all phenomena within within reality. That's all that there is. So ultimately, at the bottom, everything can be explained scientifically. Not only what we encounter in nature itself, but we also what we encounter within human experience. John Lennon, I think, probably said this most poetically in his song, Imagine. Imagine there's no heaven, it's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. That's all there is. And so as a non-theist himself, this is an artful way to explain that point of view. So let's look at the question of destiny. We want to start there because it's important for us to lay that foundation of how non-theists think about destiny. And probably there's no better person to lay that foundation for us than Bertrand Russell, a truly gifted intellect, a polymath, a professor in England back in the 1800s, I believe it was. And we have a rather long quote here that he writes, but it's worth going through. He says that man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end that they were achieving, that his origin, his growth, his hopes, his fears, his loves, and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocation of atoms. So everything about us is just the outcome of the accidental collocation of atoms. Even the love for your children and all of your beliefs, and here again, what you find in these reductionistic points of view is that they end up contradicting themselves, because if what he's saying is true, then even his beliefs are just the result of the accidental collocation of atoms. He goes on to say that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave, that all the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, and all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, these truths that have been delivered through the accidental collocation of atoms, but only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. One thing that you'll note when you carefully listen to atheists when they speak, or non-theists when they speak, is that oftentimes they resort to poetry and platitudes and these grand sweeping statements that at bottom don't reflect their true beliefs. What about the soul's habitation? what about the soul? But that's not really my point. My point here is that I love Russell's honesty when he says that there's this firm foundation of unyielding despair. Everything is headed towards this ultimate collapse, and every human being is headed towards annihilation, and we should just embrace that truth and rest our lives on this firm foundation of unyielding despair. But no one seems to be content to do that, not even the atheists, as we'll see. You see, in the face of our personal death, and I think an important question for us to ask, in the face of our personal death and the heat death of the universe, how can there be any true purpose, meaning, or value in life? There isn't. There's just this firm foundation of unyielding despair. Edvard Munch probably best captured this. The Norwegian painter Edvard Munch captured this in his painting The Scream. Now, Munch he was raised in Christian Europe, but later in life he adopted a non-theistic point of view. And here's what he says. He says, "From my rotting body flowers shall grow, and I in them, and that is eternity." That I'm not mocking Munch. I'm really not. But we get into these poetic platitudes that I'm going to continue on in the flowers. The fact of the matter is that long term you're going to continue on in this in a universe in ruins. That's all you're going to continue on in. And so there's a word for this non-theist's point of view, and that's just simply this: nonsense. Russell got it right. There's a firm foundation of unyielding despair, and we can try to put lipstick on that pig, but it's just not going to look any better. And that's also true with purpose and meaning. You see, when we start with an understanding of where we're headed, this eschatological understanding of life and the universe within a non-theistic worldview, if you start with that, then all the other questions unfold, or all the other answers unfold with respect to purpose and meaning and value. But nevertheless, atheists would like to spill a lot of ink on these particular subjects, and we want to look at some of the quotes that atheists have said. Somerset Maugham, he said, "Now the answer is plain, but it is so unpalatable that most men will not face it. There is no reason for life, and life has no meaning." Again, I appreciate his honesty, but the fact of the matter is that non-theists don't seem to be able to settle with that. Is that as we go on, we see Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, he says this, and rightfully so, is that life has no meaning. That's the truth of the matter, is that life has no meaning the moment you lose the illusion of being eternal. And Albert Camus, he writes this: "There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide." He writes that in The Myth of Sisyphus. Now, obviously, Camus was not advocating suicide, and as his book unfolds, he seeks to find, and this is where the refuge that most non-theists end up, is that they seek to create their own meaning in life and pretend like there's meaning, when in fact there really is no meaning. At the end of the day, all of the pleasures, all of your pursuits, all of your knowledge, all of your scientific advancements will not matter, because the inexorable machine of the cogs of the universe keep churning forward. Time keeps on slipping into the future. And as Russell said, that future is truly bleak. It's bleak for all of us. It's this unyielding foundation of despair. And so Carl Jung, an atheist himself and a Swiss psychiatrist, he writes this, that man cannot stand a meaningless life. And so constantly what we're trying to do as human beings, and particularly with respect to non-theists, is that we're trying to push against, but that's not just true with non-theists, is that it's true for all of us, is that we push against what seems to be a purposelessness and a purposeless and meaningless life. And we are trying to find some meaning for our existence, when in reality, there is no meaning for it. We're trying, that's what, Sartre and Camus and Russell, they come to this conclusion as a non-theist. There is no meaning, but psychologically, human beings can't tolerate that. And so Jung was right when he said that. And so we see here that another non-theist, Ruth Ozeki. Now, Ruth Ozeki is a Zen Buddhist priestess. And let's be clear about this, is that not all non-theists are non-religious. Zen Buddhism is classified as a religion, but it has it has no belief in God. And so it's a non-theistic religion. And she writes this, that I believe it doesn't matter what it is. I believe it doesn't matter what it is, as long as you can find something concrete to keep you busy while you're living your meaningless life. And there's a word for that, and that's just simply nonsense. Why? Well, consider this. What about this guy? The suicide bomber has found something to give meaning to his meaningless life. And doesn't that matter, the choice that he's made? Or what about this guy, the political dictator, the atheistic political dictator, Joseph Stalin? Is that he found something to give meaning to his meaningless life, but it doesn't matter? What about this guy, the crazed cult leader, Charles Manson? He found something to give meaning to his meaningless life. But I think that none of us, and particularly I would hope even the non-theist, would say, well, it doesn't matter what you choose. Because it does matter. It's just common sense. It does matter what you choose. What about this woman? We don't want to be accused of sexism here. And so I'm just picking on the guys here. What about this woman? The world's most pierced woman has found something to give meaning to her meaningless life. Or what about this woman? And this, by the way, is a real photograph of a real woman. It's not photoshopped. Is that the living Barbie doll has found something to give meaning to her meaningless life. And you're telling me it doesn't matter what you choose? Is that, we can come back. You see, that's the problem with a non-theistic worldview. Is that if it doesn't matter what you choose, then who are you to judge how these people spent their life? Whether it's the suicide bomber or Joseph Stalin or Charles Manson or the world's most pierced woman or the living Barbie doll, who are you to critique how they've chosen to live their lives? And so if it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, that there's this firm foundation of unyielding despair and that there is no meaning to life, well then just let these people choose what they want to choose. And so now we're faced with these. After all, if it doesn't matter what it is, as Ruth Ozeki tells us, as long as you can find something concrete to keep you busy while you're living your meaningless life. Well, I'm saying it does matter. It just, common sense tells me that it makes a difference. Remember Professor Russell? He captured the sentiment correctly. All the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, and all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. And so we have this firm foundation of unyielding despair. Friends, I'm telling you this, is that meaning for the atheist or the non-theist is nothing more than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And the ship is sinking. It truly is. And that we're all going down with it. And that nobody is going to escape. Is that we're all going to, unlike the Titanic, we're all going to drown at sea. And so in the meantime, what are we going to do? We might be able to jump into life rafts, and we might be able to push other folks away. Or we might be able to play nearer my God to thee as the ship is sinking. Or we might just rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter. Is that we're all going down. And so that's when we look at this question of meaning and purpose. But what about the question of value? Here again, let's let the atheist speak for themselves. Marvin Minsky, a professor at MIT, and so you have to be pretty smart to get that job. He says this, he's a professor in computer science, and he says this: the brain is merely a meat machine. And once again, is that we find this reductionistic point of view of a non-theist, is that at the end of the day, the brain is just a machine. It's just a meat machine. But you see what happens. You fall on your own sword when you make statements like that, because that's not only true for me, but it's also true for Marvin Minsky, that his brain is just a meat machine and it operates according to his DNA and his brain chemistry and nothing more than that. And so, if we are just meat machines, then how do you establish the value of every human life? Because with respect to mathematics, there's no question that I'm just not in Marvin Minsky's league. But, probably neither are you. And so we end up with this comparison that some brains just function better than others. And so how do you get to the place where you establish the value of every human life? I don't see that you can, quite honestly. And if we are just meat machines, then why is human life more valuable than an animal's? Dolphins have brains. Chimpanzees have brains. Your cat has a brain. Your dog has a brain. And so and those brains, if Minsky is right, those brains are just meat machines, just like your brain is a meat machine. And we have to face this question. If we're just meat machines, then why is human life more valuable than an animal's? Well, one atheist, more than one, says it isn't. Captain Paul Watson, who's the founder of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, which is an environmentalist organization, he says this: "My position is that a human life is not more important than the life of a gorilla or a whale." My position is that a human life is not more important than the life of a gorilla or a whale. The reality is that some human lives, and listen carefully, because obviously is that I don't think that Watson would say that his son or daughter is less valuable than a gorilla or a whale. And I'm convinced that he'd probably say that his own life, well, maybe he would, I don't know, because that's how ludicrous some of these statements become when we adopt a non-theistic worldview. He says the reality is that some human lives are simply not worth more than other humans, and also not more important than many animals. He goes on to say, there are many species much more important than we are. Bees and worms, trees and plankton, fish, ants and spiders, bacteria, whales, and elephants, amongst many others. And so this is where his non-theistic philosophy, this is the conclusion that his non-theistic philosophy has brought him to. And it just is one of those statements that just violates common sense. It reminds me of George Orwell's Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And certainly an animal that launches an environmentalist organization is more important than a capitalist. This is where we end up when we embrace and when we follow a non-theistic point of view to its logical conclusion. Peter Singer, himself a gifted atheist and a professor at Princeton University and teaching bioethics there, he writes this: when the death of a disabled infant will lead to the birth of another infant with better prospects of a happy life, the total amount of happiness will be greater if the disabled infant is killed. Let's just pause there for a moment. What Singer is advocating here is infanticide. And there's another name for that. It's called murder. And in his viewpoint is that it's better to go ahead and discard that disabled life and give the healthy child a chance to live. And what we see here is that it's really a philosophy that is utilitarianism. The problem with utilitarianism is that nobody's smart enough to make the calculus of what's going to become of that healthy child's life, and or how that disabled child, the life of that disabled child, might be used to accomplish a greater good. And so he says this as we read on: the loss of the happy life of the first infant is outweighed by the gain of a happier life for the second. Therefore, if killing the hemophiliac infant has no adverse effect on others, it would, according to the total view, be right to kill him. This is where Singer's atheism has brought him. And yes, he is an atheist, but it's a non-theistic approach to ethics. And you'd have to ask yourself, are you comfortable with saying that we should allow people to make that determination of which child is going to live and which child is going to die, and particularly based on some sort of calculus of their health? Is that it's just, there's a word for that, and it's demonic, is what it is. Singer goes on to say this in his book, Practical Ethics, on page 171. If we can put aside these emotionally moving but strictly irrelevant aspects of the killing of a baby, we can see that the grounds for not killing persons do not apply to newborn infants. So what he's saying there is that it's okay to kill newborn infants. In certain circumstances, it's okay to do that. Are you okay with that? He goes on to say this: the notion that human life is sacred, and just because it is human, is medieval. And there's a word for that. It's called nonsense, is what it is. And so ideas have consequences. Non-theistic worldviews have an impact on how we see ourselves and others around us. They change the way that we think about purpose, meaning, value, and destiny. And arguably, those changes do nothing to ennoble humans. We are just another animal in the saga of evolution. Non-theists, just like the Christian theist, has to account for these larger questions, or these other questions that we encounter in reality. And the non-theists' account, in my view, are not very satisfying, particularly when it comes to the question of purpose, meaning, value, and destiny. Now that's something to think about. Ideas have consequences. That's not only true for Christian theism, but it's also true for non-theistic worldviews. And some of the implications of those ideas impact how we think about our own personal purpose, meaning, value, and destiny. And with Christian theism, we arrive at hope. But with non-theistic worldviews, all that is left is what Russell clearly saw. It was this firm foundation of unyielding despair. Think about the implications.